Today, I would like to first begin by wishing you all a nice welcome. And today, among the verses of the autobiographical verses of Mikyö Dorje, yesterday we were speaking about the seventh good deed, how we practice the path of the lesser individual. So I'll continue speaking about that one, and I'll also speak about the eighth good deed, how we practice the path of a middling individual. Now, the root text for the seventh good deed, how he practiced the path of the lesser individual, is, if I have to remind you of it, as I said yesterday, there are two main sections. Since the first of these is, there are two main sections. We've already finished the first, and so now we are on the second of these, which is how he practiced the paths of the three types of individuals. And so this has three parts in terms of the three different types of individuals. And so this one discusses how he practiced the path of the lesser type of individual. And the verse reads, "Once I knew that all suffering that occurs is the result of my own wrongs, I could not complete in full unvirtuous acts with preparation, deed, and aftermath. I have not completed an unvirtuous act in this life. I think of this as one of my good deeds." And so I don't need to go through each word of the text. Now, I spoke about the meaning of it yesterday, and so to say a bit more about it again today. There's a text by Mikyö Dorje that entitled "Instructions on Training in the Liberation Story of Mikyö Dorje." And when I read it later, it seemed to me that I thought that it was probably a meaning commentary on the autobiographical versus good deeds. It's not an explication of the text, but it is an explanation of the meaning. Now, in the sixth good deed, Mikyö Dorje spoke about going for refuge to the three jewels. And so the other than the three jewels who teach the path of giving up misdeeds and practicing virtue, no other sources of refuge can teach that path. And the reason they cannot see it, they cannot do it. The other sources of refuge are unable to actually see what are the critical points of what we should do and what we should not do. And the reason for this is that they have been wandering in samsara from beginningless time. So they are unable to know what causes lead to pleasure and what causes lead to suffering. And because they don't know this, they wander in samsara, right? The perfect Buddha knows what we should do and what we should not do as it is, and tells us what we should do and what we should not do properly. And we've been taking birth in samsara from beginningless time. Now, the actual nature, ultimately, it is free of birth arising, staying, and perishing, but we don't know that. And so we have a lot of misconceptions, a lot of projections or denials about that nature. We have so many different thoughts, and for this reason, we have to wander in the three realms of samsara. And as long as we are wandering in samsara, we sentient beings, sometimes we have been one woman being's parent and sometimes their child. And so sometimes they have been our parent, sometimes they have been our child, and so forth. And so there have been innumerable times that we have been able to we've had a connection so many times in this way. Now, we don't need to think about this in terms of of harming each other, but if we think about it on the positive side, there have been many situations when we have benefited each other and when we've had really very great connections with each other. And if we think about it in terms of they have helped them, then if we would instead harm them, then the fully ripened result of that is that we experience terrible suffering. And then there are also the compatible results of experience from harming them that would arise from that. If we can think about it, for example, in terms of this our experience in this lifetime, if you are not feeling well and you have to spend a day in bed, and you're unable to sleep, and you're unable to sleep all night, then that's very difficult, isn't it? And so we haven't recognized how people have helped or harmed us throughout beginningless samsara. And so we inflict harm upon them. And because of that, we then experience harm as a result. And that's just how karma occurs, or how it occurs. And we have done many things that the things that will cause suffering in the future. And if we actually think about it in terms of their actual nature, we would never dare to do such actions ourselves. And we should make sure that this thought that we'd never dare to do anything to harm another sentient being does not decrease over our entire lifetime. And we should also do whatever we can to make sure that such thoughts of harming other beings do not occur. And so this is what it says in Mikyö Dorje's instructions on the liberation story of Mikyö Dorje. But actually, until what has a minute? When we think about karma and the results help or harm ourselves and others, there's no need to discuss people who have not entered the Buddhist teachings, who do not understand Buddhism. But most people say that they've entered the Buddhist teachings. They have eliminated through study and misunderstandings what we should have done and would have induted. So we say that we're applying the attitudes of the mindfulness and awareness, or that we may be known as learned, venerable, or good. But most people like that, when they come to when they're trying to help trying to give up help harming others and to bring benefit to others, when some problem happens, when impediment comes, they say, "It's not my fault. I have no choice but to do that. I didn't have a choice. I didn't have any. I didn't have any control. And in fact, I had no choice, and it was all because of the place, and because of time, and because that individual named such and such." And so they place the blame on the place and the time and other people. And so they forget about the needs of the next and future lifetimes. And for the sake of some minor pleasure in this life, they do all sorts of unvirtuous actions. And an example of this is like, It's like we put a piece of bait on piece of meat as a bait on a fish hook, right? And we put that in the then we put that in the water. Then the fish swim around, and when they bite it, and then they're caught on the hook, and you can catch them, right? Likewise, for some sort of minor, puny sensory pleasure, we'll give up any consideration of our own bodies and lives and livelihoods. And so this happens to many people in our actual lives, right? However, but the way Mikyö Dorje was is that it was his character, the way you can say that the way he acted. Is that even if it would mean gaining the pleasures of the gods in this lifetime, and gathering the happiness of the gods in this lifetime, he wouldn't do anything contradictory to the teachings. And likewise, even if the suffering like the lower realms were to cure in this lifetime, he wouldn't do anything contradictory to the teachings to prevent that either. For example, if you have some delicious food, but you know that there's poison in it, if you know that it's poison, and know that if you're going to eat it, die if you eat it, then any sane person, like an ordinary person, someone who's not insane basically, any sane person, so any sane person knows that no matter how hungry or thirsty they are, if their hunger and thirst blazed like fire, they wouldn't eat that poisoned food. Likewise, no matter what difficulties we encounter from ourselves and others, it is not right to give up on the true Dharma. And so Mikyö Dorje was very assiduous and careful about giving up misdeeds and accomplishing virtue. He just didn't do any old thing at all. And so for that reason, some people who had like biased attachment to the Karmapa would say, and so His Holiness, and now they're speaking about Mikyö Dorje, of course, His Holiness is so precise and careful about cause and effect. So he must be doing this for other people's sake, because if he did that, it would be okay. But otherwise, how would he do it? You're a Nirmanakaya Buddha, aren't you? They would say to him. So many people said this to Mikyö Dorje. And what Mikyö Dorje would say to them in reply was, I said, I, Mikyö Dorje, don't have any confidence at all that I am a Nirmanakaya of a Buddha. I don't have any confidence or any courage that I am a Buddha. For me to be given the title of Karmapa in this lifetime is not because I'm good at things or because I have the qualities of abandonment and realization. It is because the blessing of the activities of all the Karmapas and the Buddhas. For example, a monk or a nun might be given the name Samye, which means Buddha. So you call them Samye or Buddha. And if you say that that's the activity or the blessing of the Buddhas, that's fine, you can say that. But just calling someone by the name Samye or Buddha doesn't mean that they become a Buddha. And because they don't become a Buddha, it's certain they don't have to. It's not that they no longer need to take care about karma and results. It's just the same. So as long as I, Mikyö Dorje, am in these present aggregates of full ripening, as long as I'm stricken by birth, aging, sickness, and death, and so you can see this. But you say that I don't need to worry about karma, cause, and effect, and don't need to protect myself against that. But it's not like that, is it? And if that were true, then what better news could there be than that? And so that is what he said to others, and he also practiced in that way. He practiced as he preached. And so how is it that he actually taught, and how is it that he practiced? To give an example of this, Mikyö Dorje himself said, so that in later times, I'm not going to read this exactly, I'm not going to read it literally. It's in later times, the Sakya and the Drikpan, Kadampa, the Mahamudra lineage, the Gelugpas and others, would teach the Dharma in slightly different ways. And because of this, different individuals, people would think, and so we have different individuals because you're thinking about different individuals in different schools who then start getting sectarian. And if we get sectarian, then we'll give up our all three vows of the individual liberation, the bodhisattva vows, and tantric vows. So how is that? It's because all the monks will then go off to battle. Not only when they do that, they'll also go to destroy the representations of the three jewels. They'll also take the monastics will take each other's lives. And they would also take away all of the support, all of the patrons and so forth who support it. And so they do there's such incredibly reprehensible misdeeds and bad actions. And so doing this completely destroys the Buddhist teachings and the community of the Sangha. And and what is the basis of this comes down to, this basis of the destruction of the teachings and the Sangha. It comes when we are getting really sectarianism about Dharma and individuals, when we get sectarian about Dharma lineages. So those people who actually have faith in the teachings of the Buddha should forget about even doing them. Even if they hear about or see such actions, they should flee as far away from them as they can. So this is one thing that he said. Now another thing that Mikyö Dorje said was, some people say that if the Sakya teachings flourish, they say, oh, this is wonderful, I rejoice in this. But if the Gelugpa teaches, they're sort of like indifferent. It doesn't matter to me if the Gelugpa teaches spread or not. But to be like that is a perversion of the way great beings made offerings of practice. So when the great beings of the past would make offerings through their practice and meditation, so this doesn't. So doing that does not match the way they practice. Particularly when we think about so actually, when you think about in our Lama lineage, we have Sakyapas and Gelugpas and Nyingmas in our lineage. So when you think about and so if we are acting like this, it does not become an offering of practicing to the lineages of the Lamas. If there is someone who is if there is a good action of unmistakably giving up misdeeds and practicing virtue for the sake of his higher estates and true excellence, even if in name it is called non-Buddhist, in actuality, when you're doing it, it is a Buddhist action. If you don't do this the good actions of practicing, giving up misdeeds and practicing virtue, but you do it the other way around, even if you call it a Buddhist action, it is actually worse than a non-Buddhist. It's not better, certainly. And so for this reason, dividing individuals and Dharma into factions, and then helping or harming them, helping your own faction and harming the others, and then still thinking that you're practicing the Dharma is what we call the kind of the four touches according to four touches. So this is the same as acting according to your own wishes, according to desire and hatred and delusion and so forth. And so it's basically me saying that you're acting out of attachment and aversion. You're doing an unvirtuous action, not a dharma action. And so this is what Mikyö Dorje said in his own instructions. So when we say in instructions, this means a text that teaches where he teaches the students what they should do and what they should not do. And so in brief, all of the disharmony within the Buddha's teachings. All of the problems, all of the faults come from the attachment to external objects and to our internal mind. It's from our attachment, hatred, and arrogance, and so forth. This is what they arise from. And when Mikyö Dorje knew that, understood this, so while he was in eastern Tibet, and so in eastern Tibet, there were a lot of people who had faith in the Karmapa, and so his own side became very powerful and wealthy. And so when it came to harming other sentient beings, the misdeeds just naturally occurred. And so he left eastern Tibet and went to the region of Kongpo. Now, Kongpo, as I mentioned the other day, there were, as I said yesterday, the disputes between the Kagyu and the Gelugpa, and Mikyö Dorje resolved this results and brought stability and peace to the kingdom. And it sounded very good in the words, but in actuality, everybody in his ritual started getting very they started to act very hectically, and they did more and more misdeeds. And so there was no other way to prevent this. So he left Kongpo and went to central Tibet. Now the reason he went to central Tibet is that central Tibet was actually a Gelugpa region. In central Tibet there were kings, and because there's a king, there were laws, strict laws, since the monastics also had to follow the laws, so they had less opportunity to do all sorts of different things. And so he thought that this was good, and so for that reason he went to central Tibet. At that time, there probably wasn't anyone who was inviting him in particular. It's just that Mikyö Dorje himself said that he wanted to go there. And some people said that. So some people said, if no one's inviting us and we go without that, then aren't we going to get weak if we do that? He didn't listen to that. He went to stay in empty valleys and mountainsides, basically isolated places in central Tibet. Some brief. If he'd gone to a place where the monastics received a lot, were highly regarded, and were thought of very well, then they would have a lot of sensory pleasures. And if they had a lot of sensory pleasures, they'd naturally have start to have connections of attachment and aversion. And if they had that, there'd naturally be a lot of disputes. And so in order to prevent that, Mikyö Dorje went to stay in places with people. The local leaders and the people had little regard for the Dharma, and where they would receive few offerings and respect. And we went to such regions and stayed there. When there were monks who had pretended to be pure in the precepts about the fetching water and observing the minor precepts of the Vinaya and so forth, and they pretended to be actual monks, even though they didn't actually have the qualities in this. Then this might fool the faith of the people and make them feel faith, and they would then give many different offerings. Now they don't offer. It's because now this is not actually good that they're doing this, because they would be pretending, and that's receiving offerings out of that, and so that is actually a wrong livelihood. And because that was an impure livelihood, generally he made rules that everyone should give up, that they've had to give up meat and alcohol. And so even those who are unable to actually keep that in themselves, there were even those who made an outward pretense of following the discipline. He didn't allow them to even do to act like charlatans, pretending to be Dharma practitioners. And so at that time, the people said, as the Karmapa and his disciples should behave rudely and do not know how to get along in the world. They should behave like in the world. There are some good people, there's some bad people. There are all sorts of different people that they don't know how to fit into society. They don't know how to make connections with people, and how to placate other people. So they don't know how to do this. So take a look at them. They don't have a lot of influence, and they don't receive a lot of offerings, right? So many people spoke like this. Similarly, the great monasteries with a lot of monasteries and seats, when they were to go from one place, one fault that happened is that as many animals were killed. When a great lama would go, a lot of people in the lama's entourage, and so they went to a place where everyone had faith in them. Then people there would want to think they want to offer them good food, and if you want to offer them good food, you have to kill some sentient beings, right? And so Mikyö Dorje saw that doing so led to animals being killed and causing the difficulty. And so and wherever he went, he would very skillfully get people to stop eating meat. But in the region of Kongpo, because of the way that country, just because of the situation in the country, he was unable to stop people eating meat in the region of Kongpo. And particularly the region of Kongpo and also the region of Changtang. In Changtang, they didn't have a lot of other resources, and so they only lived off of eating meat. And so for that reason, he didn't go very often to Kongpo and Changtang. And one of the reasons he went is because they killed a lot of animals and ate a lot of meat. And so it is said that this is one reason why he did not go to these regions. And likewise, as I mentioned the other day, in the region of central Tibet, the previous Karmapas and Sharmapas, the 7th Karmapa and the 4th Sharmapa, had established the monastery of Tubchen Monastery in Lhasa and Yambacheng Monastery in Yambacheng in the north. And some of the Gelugpa monks suspected that they had founded the monasteries in order to deprive the Gelugpa monks of offerings, and so this caused a lot of disharmony between the Kagyu and the Kagyu and Gelugpa monks. And Mikyö Dorje thought about this, that it's because of the Tubchen Monastery in the Tubchen Monastery in Lhasa. Now this is later called the Karma Gunchen, so that's the spot, right? And so Mikyö Dorje realized that this is the basis for the deceit. So during his time, and so at that time the lord of U was Nedongpa. He's tried to give it back to him, for him to take care of it. And he tried to give him back, but Nedongpa wouldn't accept it. And when Nedongpa didn't expect it, so then what Mikyö Dorje did is, Mikyö Dorje didn't leave anyone there, even a guard. And we don't even need to mention a sangha. He didn't leave even a guard there, and so no one was repairing the roof, and so the roof leaked and the house fell into disrepair. There's no one looking after it. And this is while Mikyö Dorje himself was alive. And so everyone who's very partisan Kagyu followers were very unhappy about this, because the 7th Karmapa built a monastery, and Mikyö Dorje just didn't keep it up, and not only that, it totally disregarded, and it fell into disrepair and was falling down, and there was just a stripe. And we'd think the same thing these days too, right? Still, the partisans would think that, but in the actual situation, Mikyö Dorje's way of acting here was to so that everyone around him would not have to participate in disputes between members of the sangha, and so that the Kagyu and the Gelugpa, in order to bring everyone to great happiness. Likewise, from the old days until the present, not just this was just in the past, it's also in the current day. When we talk about giving up vows or breaking vows, well, the main reason for breaking vows or for disputes has been disputes over rank and position and the heights of thrones. And we have disputes over rank and the height of thrones So in the old days in Tibet, during the time of the Yuan dynasty and the Ming dynasty, the Sakyas and the Karmapas had a very high status. So the Sakyas, but later from the time of the fifth Dalai Lama, the Karma Kagyu, the Kagyu teaching distributed. But when but even then, when the Kagyu teachings declined, this fifth Dalai Lama did not put the Karmapa at a low place, but he gave him the same rank as the Sakyas. So at that time, the Sakyas and the Karmapas were about the same position, but later the Sakyas did not have as much as a high regard and high position as they had earlier during the time of the Mongol or Yuan dynasty. But the respect of the Karmapas continued in the same as before, up through the 10th Karmapa. And so everyone from all different, everyone respected him so much that and so this is something that didn't sit very well with the lamas and leaders from monasteries of other lineages. And I think, is it okay? I could do it. And so that's it. I got prostrated, and so I can't give them make a good seat for them unless they're going to give me a nice thick set of cushions, or I can't prostrate them or can't do it. The question of a lot of things, whether you should stand up for them and prostrate. For some, sometimes you give the kata, and so it's like you receive a kata from one and give another, and so this is another protocol. And third is, if there are two people of the equal rank, they prostrate to each other, and this is very difficult. It's very annoying, and so there's many difficulties about this. It's fine to go with. It'd be fine to go to see the Mikyö Dorje, but if I go, then I have to have a good seat, and it has to prostrate me. And so a lot of people would say this, and the people from the encampment would say you can't do that, and so then that created disputes between them. But at that time, in order to establish good relations with others and to resolve disputes, Mikyö Dorje would, even if other people would not prostrate him or prepare a seat for him, he would still meet with them. And when he met with them, so everyone would say all sorts of different things. And when they said all the different things they said was like, some people would talk about it in a good respect, and some would say bad things about it. The people who spoke about it negatively said, this is terrible. All of the Karmapa's greatness and influence and mystique have all been lost. Mikyö Dorje has... The Karmapas used to be in a position like the sun in the sky, and now it's brought it down to earth. He's harmed the teachings. This is terrible. No, what other people spoke about it well said, the Karmapa said, the Karmapa is Avalokiteshvara who's come to benefit beings. No. Even if the other doesn't prostrate to him or prepare seats for him, when he prostrates to them and makes seats for them, he says, this is a way to gain influence over them, and this is the action of a bodhisattva. And so they'd praise him for it. But the people who praised him and the people who criticized him both did not understand Mikyö Dorje's own intention. Now, Mikyö Dorje's own character is that when someone would come trying to compete with him and try to see that he was greater or better than him, then Mikyö Dorje wouldn't specifically put himself in an especially low position, nor would he try to elevate them and say, you're really wonderful. Even if there were ordinary people who came, even if they didn't show him any sign of respect, he'd still treat them well. And so he'd try to find the balance between falling into either extreme. And the reason for this is that in the past, there had been a great dispute between the Sakya and the Drikung, and the main thing that happened had been the disputes over rank and the size of the throne, and so because of that great dispute over rank and the threat of Holiness, that developed into large conflicts, and that created a lot of harm for the teachings of the Buddhist teachings. So there are many reasons to prevent that from happening. And so, seeing that, Mikyö Dorje acted in the way that he did. Like also, there is a story about the past lives of Mikyö Dorje, written by Mikyö Dorje himself, and what it says in that is, it's kind of strange actually, but I'm not going to read this word for word, but I'm going to explain the meaning of it. In the past of the previous Karmapas, in the time of the 5th and 6th and the 7th Karmapas, there was a Sakya Goma, the Sakya leaders. There's the Shitot Ladrang. They wouldn't send letters, but for me, Mikyö Dorje, the Sakya Shitot Ladrang sent me a letter. Not only did they that, at the end of that, it said that it had the words "kien kien." It said very, very respectful words. So they're showing me great respect. When they showed me that respect, I thought to myself, I'm very fortunate. And the reason for that is that because such great beings don't do that for no reason. They have reasons to do that. Since the people up to the Sakya Goma think that because the Sakya Goma is paying respect to me, some people say, "Oh, I must be." They give me a lot of respect because of this. But some people don't like it. They get jealous. And they'd say, "Oh, I'm coming to meet you, but when I come to meet you, you need to prostrate to me. You need to prepare a seat for me." And the reason for that is, so they're speaking to Mikyö Dorje, and the reason they say is, "My older brother, your previous incarnation prostrated to my older brother. Likewise, I'd say, they prostrated to my father, or to my mother, or to my wife, or my grandmother, or my sister. Your previous incarnation prostrated to them, right? And so you have to prostrate to me too," they say. And Mikyö Dorje, now I don't know who it was who was saying that. I'm not sure who it is, but there was someone who came and saying this. When that person came, then what Mikyö Dorje said, "Oh, you have no reason to say that," he said. "Because who are you saying are my previous lives? You're talking about my previous lives, right? If you're talking about the previous Karmapas, if you're speaking about that, then it's possible that they could do various different types of actions to tame sentient beings. It's possible they could prostrate to someone, but in general, the Karmapas are Buddhas. It wouldn't be right for them to prostrate to ordinary sentient beings, because if a Buddha prostrates to a sentient beings, and then it mixes up the interdependence. It doesn't match with the sequence of cause and effect. Now, if you're talking about my own Mikyö Dorje as an ordinary sentient being, my own previous sentient being, then I don't know. Because I don't remember prostrating to it in a previous life and you probably don't remember it either. And even if you remembered it, from beginningless sometime, I've prostrated to you, and you've prostrated to me. And so forget about prostrating. And there's no reason why you have to prostrate to just me in particular. So for that reason, in a previous lifetime, you have probably prostrated to the old guard dog who's sitting by the gate to my door. And so for that reason, so first you go and prostrate to my old guard dog, and then come back in and I'll prostrate to you, and then I can give you a nice seat, and I can give you a letter. I'll do whatever you want then. And so that's what he's saying. So he's saying this is he's saying this is a joke. And so he told this as a joke to other people. So those are jokes. Now, when you go to the serious bit, I'm talking about the actual facts. Then, what Mikyö Dorje said is the past great abbot told us that the teachings would appear to have disagreements over the ways they paid respect to each other through seats or prostrations or so forth. So it seemed that there would be these disagreements or disputes or fights between them on an external level. For example, there was a Taglen Saje Yajin, who was a very famous Lama. I think he's probably the one who founded the Martang monastery. I'm not certain exactly, but he was a very important Lama of the Taglen Kagyu tradition. So Taglen Saje Yajin, when Karmapas went to see Taglen Saje Yajin, Taglen Saje Yajin was staying in a cave, and at the gate to the cave, he didn't put down a cushion for Karmapas. He just put inside him, had him sit right there. And at that point, Mikyö Dorje got a little offended, and what he did is he turned around, sat with his back to him. So Mikyö Dorje and turned his back on the cave and sat there like that. So that was one situation that happened. And also there was a Tela monastery, the Chenga Drapa Yeshe. When Drupta Ojimpa came to visit him, he didn't give him a good seat. When he didn't do that, then Drupta Orjin got a little bit offended. And as he was prostrating, he saw that there wasn't a good seat, and he stopped prostrating and started quarreling with him. So the past and current great beings will do various different things in order to sort of examine the levels of different sentient beings. And so Mikyö Dorje said, I prostrate and go for refuge to those great beings with great respect. The great beings of the past have prostrated, have had these disputes in the past, and so of course we are going to too. And so for that reason, so we cannot say that there are many disputes in the past between scholars and practitioners and masters over receipts and offenses, but we can't and so forth. And we can't say that necessarily all offensives. But the disputes that arise solely from the power of detachment and so forth are the basis of greatness, as we can see very clearly in these days. Now, there's also quite a bit about this in the Mountain Dharma by Karma Chakme. And we talk about how do we think about positions and the height of thrones and so forth in Tibet. The reason it came about was that in Tibet there are the Mongol kings and the Chinese kings. When they would invite the emperors would invite the Tibetan lamas, they'd give them high titles, give them a high position, and would give them different colored cushions and different colored seals and stamps. And for that's how they got that sort of status. Before that, there were no such privileges and status. For example, if you think about Marpa and Milarepa and Gampopa, Dusum Kempa, Dukung Chopa, Taklung Tangpa, and others, did they have any privileges and status? They didn't at all. And so Drogon Palmo Drukma, so he had 5,000. He had 5,000 very well-known, famous students, and who's giving teachings to them? Drogon Palmo Drukma had only a small seat of had a skin seat. It was a very thin skin seat that he's sitting on, or a hide, an animal hide seat. Now, in our Vinaya, there was no seniority in terms of place, of position, and so forth. But in the Vinaya, it's all in terms of seniority of taking the precepts. Now, in the Vajrayana, there's seniority in terms of realization, but there's no other situation position. In the places where the great monasteries in central Tibet, there's so many monks that they have a tradition of doing what they call the fast. And the way that this worked is that everyone would stand outside of the gates with the gates closed, and then they would open the gates and everyone would rush in, and whoever got to the front got to sit there. So I think this is actually has probably a seed, and there's a seeds of this in the Vinaya, but other than that, there is no reason. It's no tradition of doing this. But later, there were the positions of giving people the different ranks, people of different ranks in the in different positions in the ranks. And so this is there was a student of Chöpa Sungye, and so there are 8 major students of this, and one of these was Tsangapa Tsundru. Tsangapa Tsundru was a very learned master. So one time, he went to a great monastic college, and when he was there, there were great disputes over the ranks, and so he didn't have any place to sit, so he didn't go any place to get. He had to sit back with the servants, and so he was a little bit. So he's got a little offended. They're thinking, now I'm such a great scholar, and they're criticizing me. So the next morning, what he did then is, before he got up, what he got? He got a donkey. So he took a donkey, and he put the 3 Dharma robes on it, and he brought it into the temple, and put it at the head, and tied it to the pillar at the front of at the head of the ranks. And so everyone came in the next morning. They think, what's happening? Why is there a donkey there? And so then someone was saying, what is that? And what Tsangapa said is, this has a very nice. This has such a nice voice. And wears such nice robes, so I put it at the front of the hang. You see, donkeys are very nice when they take it. So there's something to it saying that, because at the umze is at the front of the ranks. It doesn't have a lot of education, has nice clothes, but they sit up at the front of that. So if you get to sit at the front of the rows because you have a nice voice and you have good clothes, then you can put that donkey at the front of at the head of the rows, right? And so there are a lot of events similar to this one. And so the position in the ranks and positions and privileges happened after the connections with the Mongol and the Chinese emperors. But before then, there was no question of privilege or rank. So in brief, Mikyö Dorje in order to tried in many different ways to prevent and to stop the great stream of misdeeds within himself. And he also did what he could to sever that stream of misdeeds within others as well. And whether someone who was a monastic who'd gone forth, or in the teachings, or lay people who had not, he he advised them on how to give up misdeeds and practice virtue, and he actually brought them to act virtuously. So there are many infinite numbers of such situations. As is said in the Prajnaparamita Sutras, what it says is, a great irreversible bodhisattva abandons the 10 non-virtues themselves, gets others to abandon them, and declares the excellence of abandoning them, and acts according to that, accordingly. So the great irreversible bodhisattvas abandon the 10 virtues unto themselves. They get others to do it. They praise those who have abandoned them and encourage others to act in the same way. So in Mikyö Dorje, it's not necessarily to say anything else. When many people saw Mikyö Dorje or heard him teach, there are a lot of people who promised to give up killing and to give up stealing, to giving up on reneging on their oaths, or to not be deceitful in business, or to use their wife to save lives, to free prisoners from prisons, to save the lives of sentient beings, of animals, to get people to promise to not cause harm to temples or representations of the Buddhist speech and mind. You got people to abide by the discipline of vows, of the fasting vows, to make vows to become vegetarian. And also, there are infinite people who, and to recite the 100 million Mani mantras. So there are infinite people who made these, to do this. And so, in general, this is primarily during the Black Crown ceremony that people made these promises. So in the short term, he blocked by encouraging the practice of virtue, in the short term, he blocked the way of the ways for them to be rebirthed in the lower realm, and opened the gate to the higher realms, ultimately bringing them to Buddhahood. And so he showed us a great example of a great being. And if we can believe that and think it as true, then there's great benefits to us. Because sometimes we believe it, but we don't really believe it. And we keep all these stories about people, about how one person harmed another and so forth. We kept everything about the older students keep these factional ideas in their minds. They tell them to the younger monastics, and the younger monastics keep it up, and so it's keep going from generation after generation. So, but very few people talk about how people do the good deeds of giving up misdeeds and practicing virtue. But they're always talking about the actions out of attention and aversion. They talk about the heights of thrones, the positions and stuff. They say that they talk about how in the past it was like this and now we're not then. So they often sometimes even crying as they talk about this. But when you talk about the misdeeds, you don't really ever see anyone who's crying over the great person, over a great being who's giving up misdeeds and practicing virtue. They say, "Oh, it's important, it's great," but they don't really have feeling about it. And so for that, you need to know what is the real liberation of a great being, and that is what we need to look at. So, being factional, trying to get high ranks and positions. And criticizing great beings, these are things that we should consider as not being good, as not being authoritative, and so we should avoid these as much as we can. So that is enough for right now. We will take the break. Next, I would like to speak about the 8th good deed. Now, the 8th good deed is how he practiced the path of the middling individual. And the verse reads, "Until we fully cross the ocean of birth and death, nowhere in the 3 realms are pleasures and riches permanent. I wondered, when will I be liberate forever all being throughout space from the 3 realms of samsara? I think of this as one of my good deeds." So now in Mikyö Dorje's own Instructions on Training and the Liberation story of Mikyö Dorje, to discuss in brief, it says in above, when he'd been speaking about the path of karmic cause and effect, which is the path of the lesser type of individual properly practicing the karmic cause and effect. And so when you're practicing karma, cause and effect, then what's most important is that you avoid harming other sentient beings. But when you say you're not harming sentient beings, not harming other sentient beings, but just merely not inflicting harm on them in the short term, does that mean that that other sentient being is free from harm or liberated from harm? It does not mean that. And this is because that other sentient beings in their own continuum, there is a lot. They have all the karma, the causes, the karma and afflictions, and also the other sentient beings with whom they have karmic connections, and who would harm them, and so they're infinite other sentient beings with whom they're connected through karmic cause and effect. And what is the root of harming other sentient beings? We need to give that up. Now, the basis of causing harm depends upon karma and afflictions. Now, afflictions are the motivation, right? The actual action is the misdeeds that we do. The actual karma is the misdeeds. So if we do not do bad karma, then even if all the sentient beings in samsara were to come together and try to harm us, then they would not be able to harm us. And if we do not do any action that would lead to rebirth in the lower realms or in samsara, then no other sentient being could throw us into samsara or cast us down into the lower realms. And so the one who actually really harms us, the ultimately harms us, is the view of the self and the other afflictions in our own beings. There is no other greater harm than that. That is the fundamental harm or the fundamental cause of our harm. But up until now, we haven't seen the afflictions such as the view of the self as being enemies or as being the cause of harm. And instead, we have thought about them as being on our side. Particularly our ego Kagyu, we thought as being our own side and as our advisors. And that's how we think of them. And so that the thought of clinging to a self and of cherishing ourselves, because of that, we have accumulated many misdeeds and non-virtues. And so in past lives, we have done everything that could possibly have been done. So if we think about even any one sentient being, so for example, like think about the destruction of the earth at the end of an eon by either by fire or by water. This can destroy all the sentient beings. This can destroy all the possessions in the three world, but it cannot stop the continuum of our beings. So for this, what we need to do to stop that sequence of being reborn in samsara because of karma inflictions is we need to train in the methods and the prajna that can free us from that. And what that method is to do the practice of doing what we should do and avoiding what we should not do according to the four truths. So just as saying we need to identify what karma is and we should view as suffering, the truth of suffering as being an illness, the truth of origin as being like a cause of illness. So we need to, and similarly, we need to know what we need to take up and what we need to give up in the four noble truths. And where is this taught? This is taught in the Dharma teachings of the Buddha, of the three vehicles and of the sutras and the tantras. And so it is absolutely indispensable for us to practice these. And while we're practicing them, we shouldn't just say, oh, I'm practicing them, have a mere understanding them. We need to have an actual experience or feeling from practicing them. For example, if you think of a poisonous snake would suddenly get into your neck, you'd immediately cry out and throw it away, right? Similarly, we should see the afflictions within our being as being like poisonous snakes, and think, how can we get away from them? And we have to have that sort of intention and that sort of diligence. And we have to have a strong feeling that we need to be like this. And so this is what it says in Mikyö Dorje's instructions in training in the liberation stories of Mikyö Dorje. Now, Mikyö Dorje himself did this in his actual practice. And how do we know this is that when some people would say to him sometimes, oh, someone died. Some person maybe named Tashi died. And after they died, he was probably freed from the lower realms and has probably achieved the level of a universal emperor. And so people would come and say this to him, right? Oh, someone, my relative died, and they went to some sort of a guru or who did divinations or astrologers. And they'd say, I have a lot of love for my relative, but when they died, so I have a lot of worries about where did they die. So where did they die? Please tell me where they died, where they were reborn. So please tell me where they've been reborn. And suddenly the guru would pretend to have some clairvoyant powers and kind of close their eyes. Recite a few tens of thousands of monies and make some and you give me some offerings and I'll let you know. And then they'll say, oh, no problem, they say. Then a few later, and they'd come back, they'd go back and say, I've done everything you asked now. They said, now if they still want to get a little more, they'd say, it's still not quite. You need to give me a little bit more. You need to give me a little bit more, is what they'd say. And if they think that there's not much, and think that there's some sort of a bigger response we need to get, you say, oh, there's no problem at all. Nope, nothing. It's freed of the lower realms. And it's been reborn near the god Indra. Or it's been born a lotus in the realm of Sukhavati, or something like that. When they say that. And so when people would come and tell this to Mikyö Dorje, and when they'd say that, then Mikyö Dorje would say, if we are unable to completely eliminate the pernicious illness of a view of the self, the liberation of being freed from the lower realms for a birth or two and achieving the pleasures for a birth or two and achieving the samsaric pleasures and wealth are not enough. It is not and so also when you'd actually see someone who is afflicted from hunger or is suffering of hunger, when you'd see someone who had nothing to eat and no clothes to wear, no shoes for their feet, no hat for their head, and when he saw people in such desperate situations, or when he'd hear about them, he would really worry about it deeply, just as if it were happening to himself. Later, when you'd hear that the person was in the situation a bit better now, then at that point, it is they're freed from that at the time being, but does that count as real liberation? They will have the bad. they'll have to experience the results of their even worse, even stronger karma than that, and experience endless ocean of suffering in the lower realms and so forth. And so, so you get a real sort of an illness where he would be so worried that he'd get dizzy and unable to think clearly. Now, sometimes Mikyö Dorje would ask about the person and said, "How are things going for that person? Did things turn out well? Have you heard anything about them?" He would ask. When he'd ask about them, in those days, it wasn't like today, and you wouldn't hear news immediately. When they say there's no news, so we don't really know it, or we don't sense it when all other sentient beings sink into the ocean of samsara, of suffering, do we? Or he would say, until they're liberated forever from samsara, then no matter what we do, it's not really going to help. But it isn't that. But sometimes it wasn't as if he was afraid of the suffering of samsara and feeling as if it had nothing to do. It's that he just didn't know what he could do to help other sentient beings. It wasn't like that at all. He was afraid of samsara, and he had a very strong feeling that he had a great feeling of fear of the suffering for himself. And he also couldn't bear the thought of other sentient beings experiencing the suffering of samsara. But sometimes when you have a thought like that and you see a really bad situation, sometimes you have nothing to do, you have a lot of fear, you don't know what to do, and you're unable, you don't know where you should go, you aren't able to sleep at night, and your food loses all flavor. That's what happens to us. But it wasn't like that for Mikyö Dorje. Instead, what happened? He said, the way to free yourself from the suffering is what the Buddha taught. And so he'd study that. And the method was practicing the Four Truths. And the prajna would hear the prajna of realizing the two types of selflessness. So with those two, the prajna and method, whatever practice when he would begin, he would study, he'd practice, and day and night he would work hard in order to really habituate himself to this. And so he was extremely diligent. And he would also tell people, you should practice the Four Noble Truths in this way. Some people would say that some people say they don't have a lot of merit in this lifetime. They don't have a good house, and they always have leaks in their house and things like that. Things aren't working out, or they might have a nice house or a nice car, and then it always breaks down. Or in their family, they always have problems in their lifetime. So these are people who, in Tibetan, we always say they lack merit. So there are people like that, and when people are suffering, and people are unable to. And so there are also people who also are unable to unbear their suffering, and they'll even kill themselves, right? And so if we practice the Dharma, if we're practicing the Dharma merely to be happy in this lifetime, or they understand practicing Dharma is to bring happiness in this lifetime and to be free of suffering in this lifetime. And so this ancient, so they go to see some lamas, and some people would say, there's no problem about the suffering of samsara, because everything that arises is the Dharmakara. Everything that arises is the display of the Dharmakara. So just rest within these confused appearances as they are, without being distracted. And it'll work out. And so rest in the confused appearance themselves, and everything will work out. You don't need to worry about anything. Just sit there. Some people speak like this. And some people, what they say is, they just aren't satisfied. That's not, if there's no, that's a kind of ridiculous. I mean, that's not okay. So for this lifetime, I need to do, they try to do something to do a little bit of listening, contemplating, and meditation. But they do that in order to gain happiness and pleasure in this lifetime. And so if you look at it on the outside, it looks at that they have, like their desires as intense as a fire to practice listening, contemplation, and meditation. But in actuality, they're really only doing it for the sake of listening, contemplating, and meditation. But that listening, contemplating, and meditation would then be pointless. And the reason for that is when you practice the listening, contemplation, and meditation in Dharma, is in order to achieve liberation in the state of Buddhahood, not for the state of this lifetime. And so for this reason, there's no need to do study and to listen, contemplate, and meditate on the Dharma for the sake of this life. There are many other things you can do. And so Mikyö Dorje himself would never do such actions himself. So that is a brief description of how Mikyö Dorje practiced the path of the middling type of the individual. Now, with the great individual, there's a lot about the great individual. So the rest of this text is all about the path of the great individual. So we've got up to the 8th great here. Now from the 9th, and then from now on, these are all about the practice of the path of the greater type of individual. So if we just take a look at those. So now, I don't think I can teach the entire text this year, the entire text, the autobiographical verses, good years this year. The reason for this is that as I teach them, I need to give a bit of explanation to them. If I just read them, then there's no point to it. So at the beginning, I give a lot of explanation. At the end, I don't give an explanation. I just read them as fast as I can. There's no point. So at some point, we're going to have to. So at the beginning, if you, so I think it's not good to start out and being really doing as much as you can at the beginning, then kind of just blowing it off at the end. That's not good. So I'll teach as much as I can, and then in the future, next year, I will continue the teaching. If I just try really hard, then it will not good be for my health, and the teachings and what I say will not be as good. And so today, we've had a lot of discussion about meat in the 7th and 8th good deeds. So Mikyö Dorje often prohibited the eating meat. Now Mikyö Dorje himself, as I mentioned the other day, I've explained this already. There are many reasons for stopping to eat meat. Now, from one perspective, is that in the Kagyu Great Encampment, during the times of during the previous Karmapas, the meat and alcohol were not allowed to be brought into the Great Encampment. And when I speak about the Kagyu Great Encampment, I'll speak about that in more detail. So in the past, there's already a tradition of not taking meat and alcohol. And so I think that's one reason why he's prevented the eating meat. And also, when Mikyö Dorje, when he was young, he was given the title and put on the throne as a Karmapa, but he did not have a lot of control or a lot of freedom, as I've mentioned before. And so all the power was in the hands of the leaders of the encampment, of the people below him. And so it's like, and then they all, and the power actually all ended up in one of their wives' hands. And so at that point they did whatever they had. Then what happened? So then all the animals that were offered to the encampment were killed, and their flesh was eaten. Also, Mikyö Dorje, when he was young, people came and talked to him. So we need to have ganachakras. And we have a ganachakra, you have to have meat and alcohol, right? And so how is it if we each have a big piece of mutton? And Mikyö Dorje said, that doesn't work at all. You can't eat the mutton during that. So from the time that he was young, even when he was at a very young age, Mikyö Dorje people in the encampment did not respect the previous traditions of the encampment and would have meat and alcohol. And in particular, they'd eat meat without any restraint. And so when Mikyö Dorje himself got a bit of influence and a bit of control, he made a rule that they were not allowed to eat meat at all. It's a very strict rule. Likewise, many of you in the Shadows have read his Mikyö Dorje's commentary on the Vinaya, the orb of the sun. For example, when he said, even when we do the Mahakala pujas at the end of the year, we cannot include meat in those offerings. So he speaks about this very clearly there. So not only did he prohibit meat in the great encampment, Mikyö Dorje also encouraged everyone and all over Tibet to become vegetarians. And when we look at the index of his collected works, what it says, there is advice on to the people of Tibet how it is inappropriate to eat the meat of those who lack of the defensive animals. But now these texts are ones that we do not have, so we can't get them. I hope that we can get these soon, and if we can, then there'll be something we can speak about. In any case, Mikyö Dorje prohibited meat within the encampment, and also advised everyone in Tibet that it's encouraged everyone in Tibet strongly that they should be vegetarian and give up eating meat. And so I thought I would speak about that in the next day or two when I speak about the Great Encampment. When we speak about Mikyö Dorje, and we speak about all these life stories, we always talk about the Great Encampment. But since we don't have a Great Encampment, we kind of wonder, what was the Great Encampment like? We kind of have some doubt or some suspicions about this. And we can't get a mental image of what the picture of it in our mind. What was the Great Encampment like? And so for that reason, I've been saying I'll be teaching about the Great Encampment, but teaching about the Great Encampment is not so easy because the events with the Great Encampment, the situation is not consigned all in one text. It's in one text. It's they're a little bit in many different texts and the different life stories and so forth. And to gather it all together is not so easy. But I thought maybe I'll try tomorrow. If I don't teach about the Great Encampment tomorrow, then it's probably because that I'm not human, that I'm a dog. So I have to give myself a bit of push. And if I don't push myself, then I'm not going to say anything at all. And so tomorrow I thought I'd probably speak about the Great Encampment, but I'm not sure if I can meet all of your expectations in teaching about the Great Encampment. Now, the reason for speaking about the Great Encampment is that, from one perspective, it is related to the activities and life story of Mikyö Dorje, so we have to speak about it. And from another perspective, we need to know what are the reasons why the Great Encampment was first formed. How is it that it continued, and how it flourished in the middle, and then when we understand this, I think we'll well, I think we'll understand better what Mikyö Dorje's intentions and what his actions are. And so I think we have no choice but to speak about the Great Encampment tomorrow. And so that's it for today. And now we'll recite the prayers.